So your PC shuts down and won't turn back on. Or you bought a second-hand system and you realize that it won't boot. Or you just built a brand new PC and you just want to know what you did wrong. So you grabbed your phone, went to Google, looked up how to fix a broken PC, and this video came up. Hi, I'm the Technophile, and I've been fixing and flipping PCs for a little over 5 years now. In this video, I'm going to be giving you a complete breakdown of every single common PC problem you could be having. How to identify each problem that you could be experiencing, and the steps you can take to fix your problem. And the first step is to identify which situation you're in. Since this is a video, I don't know the exact situation you're in, but the good news is you do. So on the screen right now, I have a list of situations and timestamps. I want you to think about the situation you're currently dealing with. Then identify which one of the mock situations that I've come up with fit your problem. And then all you have to do is go to the timestamp listed next to that situation. For example, if your computer doesn't turn on at all, no lights, no nothing, all you have to do is click the first timestamp. But if your computer turns on but just doesn't display an output, click on the second timestamp. I think you get where I'm going. And before we get into troubleshooting, I have to say that this is for educational purposes only. I'm not at fault if you do something wrong during this process. And without further ado, let's get into the diagnosis. Welcome to Ground Zero. You hit the power button and nothing happens. And while you might be thinking this is the worst possible problem to be having, it's actually one of the better ones. At the very least, I can promise you that if you follow the advice I'm about to give you, you can identify, if not solve your problem. But before we start, I'm going to be going over some of the most common problems that you could be having that have indicators that make them very easy to identify. If you connect your PC to electricity and their LEDs are glowing, but when you hit the power button, it doesn't do anything, it's likely that your actual power button itself isn't wired correctly. This is a really easy problem to have as the pins change for every single case and where they go changes for every single motherboard. But luckily for you, it's a really simple fix. All you have to do is consult your motherboard's manual and your case's manual, and they'll have complete diagrams telling you how exactly to wire them. For example, this 2-pin connector is my power cable, and it goes right in the middle of a bunch of other small connectors. If any single one of these connectors were misaligned, several of the buttons on my PC just wouldn't work. But that's just one situation. Another common problem is when you click the power button, a flash of light flickers to your PC, and it shuts off about half a second later. This likely means that either your connections are bad or your power supply is faulty. Check the ATX and CPU connectors for dust. Maybe unplug them and plug them back in a couple times, and then try again. If that doesn't do anything, you can keep following along. I might be able to solve your issue, but do know that your power supply is most likely damaged and needs to be replaced. Now with those outliers out of the way, let's get to the actual meat of the video. The first thing I want you to do is to make sure your PC is powered on correctly. This sounds simple, but this is like 50% of people's issues. At the back of the PC, you'll find a switch labeled 1 and O. It's right on the power supply. You want to make sure that that switch is powered on with the 1 facing down. You also want to make sure that the outlet you're plugged into actually provides power and that it's the only thing connected to that outlet. Also make sure that the cable is fully connected. Again, this sounds simple, but this happens to me all the time. If you're using a power strip or surge protector, make sure that the PC is plugged directly into the wall. For testing purposes, just get rid of them. It's also a good idea to swap your power cables. So if you have a spare one, try it. If you don't, it's likely not the issue. It's rare that power cables ever go bad. Now that we know it's not an external factor, let's start looking inside the PC. The next thing that we're gonna do is clear the CMOS. Don't worry, it's not as complicated as you think. Now, before you do this, make sure to disconnect all of your peripheral devices like keyboards, mouse, disconnect it from the power, so take the power cord out and flip that switch to back, and then we're gonna perform a power drain. To perform a power drain, all you have to do is hold down the power button for about 20 seconds. This way, all the electricity built up in your PC is gone. Now it's time to take off the side panel. Different cases are gonna have different ways to take off a side panel. It's likely 2 screws or 2 to 4 knobs. However, it's worth to note that some pre-built PCs like Alienware's have really weird ways to open their cases, and if you do have one of those cases, there's plenty of tutorials online telling you how to open any case. Once you have your case open, you're gonna look for the motherboard, and once you find it, you're gonna locate the silver cylinder, and that's the CMOS battery. Now, before you do this, make sure you are not connected to a electricity. It's dangerous to touch electronics with the power connected. And then press down on this little tab to release the CMOS battery, keep it out of your motherboard for about 2 to 5 minutes, and then put it back in. And it's that simple to clear your motherboard BIOS. Now try powering on your PC and see if it does anything. If it still shows no signs of booting, let's move on to the next solution. Next, we're gonna make sure all the power supply cables are connected correctly. You're gonna wanna check the ATX connector to your motherboard, the CPU connector to your CPU, and the PCI connector for your graphics card. And if you're using a modular power supply, make sure all of the cables on the back of the power supply itself are set correctly. Also, if you're using cable extensions, I recommend taking them off, as I've had multiple of those fail just in the past year. With those disconnected and then reconnected, try to boot up your PC. And if that didn't solve the problem, let's move on to the next step. The next thing we're gonna do is remove all the non-essential components out of the PC. So everything but your motherboard, your CPU, your RAM, and your power supply. So once again, make sure you're disconnected from electricity, perform a power drain, and then remove all non-essential components. This includes all storage devices, a graphics card if you have one, all peripherals like CD players or capture cards, and even all but one stick of RAM. Now, if you already know how to disconnect these components, skip to this timestamp. But if you don't, here's a mini tutorial. To disconnect a graphics card, the first thing you're gonna do is take the power supply cable out of it. Just hold down on the tab and wiggle the cable out. Then you're gonna actually unscrew it from the case. Then with your hand below the graphics card to support it, pull the tab on the motherboard down until you hear a click. This will release the card from the motherboard. Then all you have to do is gently pull the card out of the case and store it in a clean, dry environment. To remove your storage devices, first find out if you have a hard drive, an SSD, or an M.2 SSD. To disconnect a hard drive, all you have to do is take out those two cables sticking out of it. The same goes for an SSD. Note that with these, you don't actually have to take it out of the case entirely. You just have to disconnect those two cables so that the PC doesn't recognize them anymore. However, for an M.2 SSD, you are gonna actually have to take it out of the computer. And that's because it sits right on top of the motherboard screwed in, and that's how it gets its power. All you have to do is unscrew that one screw, the SSD will flip up diagonally, and all you have to do is gently take it out and store it in a safe, clean environment, and we'll move on. You're gonna be removing all but one stick of RAM, and this is super easy. All you have to do is press down on the tabs on the motherboard and pull the RAM out. Make sure to keep all the RAM in and keep it in the furthest spot away from the CPU. All right, now we're gonna take some time to make sure all of our components are correctly disconnected from the PC. All you should have is your CPU in the motherboard with one stick of RAM and a power supply to power it all. If you have a CD drive, make sure to disconnect that. If you have a capture card, make sure to disconnect that. And now that we know that everything is disconnected properly, let's move on to the next step. First, reconnect your power cable and turn on the PC. If this doesn't work, but you have another stick of RAM that you took out of your PC, try swapping both the stick and the motherboard slot. So if your PC is pretty dusty, make sure to clean out these RAM slots, because that could be your problem. Now, if you followed these steps up to this point and your PC still isn't working, unfortunately, it's time to take your PC to a professional. That's because it's very likely that one of the main 4 components in your PC is faulty. Now, you could try and reseed your CPU, that is an option, but unless you have extra thermal paste lying around, I wouldn't do it. And yes, if you have spare parts lying around, you 100% can swap them, but most people don't. So let's talk about taking your PC to a professional. If you're really confident in your ability to handle PCs, then you can always order the parts yourself. There's a trick I use that if I don't know exactly what's wrong with the PC, I'll buy all of the components at the same time and then return the ones I don't need. So you could buy replacements for all 4 of those main PC components and then try swapping them yourself. Then all you have to do is return the ones that you don't need to replace. Another option is to ask around to see if anyone you know has PC components. Now, this is pretty unlikely, but on the off chance they have compatible parts, then it's a great way to not spend any money trying to get a diagnosis. But if you're not confident handling a PC, I completely understand. You can take your PC to any Best Buy, Geek Squad, Micro Center, or any other local computer hardware store, and they'll diagnose your PC for you. Personally, I recommend Best Buy just because they give you free diagnosis, and they're located pretty much everywhere in the United States. But honestly, most hardware stores are very good at what they do, so you can use whichever one you like the most. It's also worth considering that a repair might not be practical for your machine. If you end up needing a replacement motherboard or CPU, and your PC is 3 years old or older, it can be really hard to find replacement components. Also consider that at some point in time, repairing a PC is just going to be more expensive than buying a new one. If you're not using your computer computer for gaming or video editing, it probably costs around $300 to buy a brand new replacement. And if the parts are gonna cost $150 and the repair's gonna cost $100, well then it's probably just worth it to buy the new PC. But that's just something to keep in mind when the professionals inevitably try to upsell you. So your PC turns on but doesn't give any video output. This means that you can't get to BIOS, let alone getting to any operating system like Windows. Well, I've got good and bad news for you. The bad news is this is the most diverse problem you could be facing, which makes it very hard for me to accurately diagnose your PC without seeing it personally. But the good news is if you run through every step I'm about to show you, you have like a 90% chance to solve your problem. And I like those odds. The first thing I want you to do is make sure your HDMI, DVI, or DisplayPort is plugged in correctly. I can't tell you how many times I've been working on a PC and one of those cables wiggles out just enough to make it not work. You should also make sure that whatever monitor or TV you're using is set to the right input. Different monitors have different ways to do this, but if your monitor is not set to the correct output, it's not going to display anything. The next thing I want you to do is to make sure that this is in fact a PC problem. To do this, I recommend you have at least 2 different types of cables. Try HDMI, try DisplayPort, try DVI, just try 2 of them. You should also try connecting to another monitor, and I understand if you don't have another monitor, but almost everyone has a TV, and that works just fine. You should also disconnect all your USB peripherals, as sometimes they could cause this problem. If your PC has a graphics card, make sure you're plugging the cable into the graphics card and the motherboard. Try them both. Depending on your situation, your graphics drivers may be installed incorrectly and they might not even be installed at all. And this can cause your GPU to not give an output or even be the only output. Also, if this is your first time trying to boot a brand new PC, you should try waiting 5 to 10 minutes on boot. Sometimes on first boot, it can just take forever. If none of these solutions help you, then we're gonna try clearing the CMOS. Now before you do this, make sure all peripheral devices are disconnected, you unplug the PC from the wall, and now we're gonna perform a power drain. All you have to do for a power drain is hold down the PC's power button for 20 seconds. Now it's time to take off your side panel. Normally it's just 2 screws or 2 to 4 knobs, and your side panel pops right off. But in some cases like pre-builts, especially Alienware PCs, it can be really unintuitive to take off your side panel. But in that case, there's plenty of online tutorials on how to take apart each case, so I'm not gonna go over them here. Once your PC is open, locate the little silver cylinder on your motherboard, and that's the CMOS battery. Keep it out of the case for like 2 to 5 minutes, and then put it back into your PC. And congratulations, you've just cleared the CMOS and reset your motherboard's BIOS. If your BIOS is set up incorrectly, it could be causing your PC not to detect an input, but clearing the CMOS solves that problem. Now it's time to try and turn your PC back on. If it still doesn't show any signs of booting, we'll move on to the next step. The next thing we're going to be doing is cleaning the inside of your PC. The main things we want to clean here are the RAM and power supply connectors. Dust, hair, and other debris can get in these connection points and cause the connection to sever. To do this, first remove the RAM sticks from the motherboard. Press down on the tabs above the RAM in the motherboard to release the RAM and then pull it out. Then with an anti-static brush or microfiber, gently dust both the RAM sticks themselves and the RAM slots. If your PC's older, you should check to see if there's any black buildup on your RAM's connectors. If you see any, make sure to take an eraser and gently erase all of that black gunk off of there. Next, disconnect your CPU and ATX power cables from your motherboard. Make sure to clean both the cable itself and the connector connected to the motherboard. Lastly, if you have a modular power supply, you should look to clean your cables on that side too. Once you're done cleaning, make sure to plug your cables back in and put your RAM back in its slots. And then you can try to boot your PC again. Most of the time, this is the problem, but if that doesn't work, I still have a few solutions for you. Next, we're going to test to see if one of your RAM sticks or slots are faulty. And just like you did before, remove one stick of RAM from the PC, but keep the other one in. Then reconnect your PC to power and see if it turns on. If not, take that stick of RAM and put it back into your computer. Now we're going to take the other RAM stick out. Try to boot your PC with the other RAM stick, and if it still doesn't work, we kind of know that it's either all of your RAM or none of it. Unfortunately, this only works if you have more than one RAM stick. So if you're only rocking one, I'm sorry. If your PC doesn't boot, then we're gonna move on to the graphics card. Now, if your PC doesn't have a graphics card, you can skip to this timestamp here, but if it does, keep following along. This step only works if your CPU has integrated graphics. The majority of modern CPUs have integrated graphics. They just are kind of required at this point. But you can check to make sure if you know the name of your CPU by Googling. If you don't know the name of your CPU, then there's not really a way to find out without taking off the cooler. And unfortunately, unless you have extra thermal thermal paste lying around, you don't want to do that. So if you don't know the name of your CPU and you don't know if it has integrated graphics or not, keep following along, but keep in mind this isn't going to be as accurate. Now we're going to disconnect your graphics card. First, we're going to disconnect the power supply cable on the graphics card. You can do that by holding down on the tab and then gently wiggling it out. Then you're going to unscrew the graphics card from the case, hold your hand under the graphics card while you hit the tab holding the graphics card in next to the PCI Express slot. Then gently pull your graphics card out of the case and store it in a clean, dry environment. Now plug your display cable into your motherboard and see if it boots up. If it does, it's likely that your graphics card is faulty. But if it still isn't booting up, then we'll move on to the next step. The next thing we're gonna do is to try and flash your BIOS. Now keep in mind, if your PC has ever booted up before, this is not the issue. But if this is a brand new PC, especially a PC that came out within the last 3 years, it's actually pretty likely that this is your problem. It's also not even possible to do unless this button is on the back of your motherboard, and older boards don't even have this functionality. But if your problems sound a lot like what I'm describing, then keep following along. To flash your BIOS, the first thing you're gonna need is a flash drive. You're gonna plug that flash drive into another PC and look for the most up-to-date version of your motherboard's BIOS. Make sure your flash drive is completely empty and then download the BIOS onto that motherboard. But depending on your motherboard's brand, this can differ quite a bit, so I just recommend looking up a tutorial for your specific motherboard. Once those BIOS are successfully downloaded onto your flash drive, you can then plug that flash drive into the back of your motherboard. Then hit the button on the back of your motherboard and you should see an orange LED start flashing. It's at this point that your BIOS have started updating and you should leave it alone. After some time, this light will stop flashing and that means your BIOS are successfully updated. It's super important to not unplug this USB from your device while it's updating, as that will literally break your motherboard. Now that your BIOS are successfully flashed, you can try to boot up your PC. If you tried all these steps up to this point and your PC still won't show a display, then it might be time to take your PC to a professional. It's likely that one of your core components is faulty. At this point, it's probably the power supply or RAM, but there are some one-of-a-kind issues, which mean it could be the motherboard and it could be the CPU. Fortunately, unless you already have replacements for these, there's not much left I can tell you to try. Here are your options for taking your PC to a professional. If you're really confident in your ability to handle your PC, you can always order your own replacement parts. A trick I always use is to order all of the parts that I think could be faulty at the same time, and once I have them all, I replace them one by one, and since normally only one part's faulty, I'll return the other parts that I don't need for a full refund. Another option is you could ask around to see if anyone you know has replacement parts. Now this is highly unlikely and you need to make sure that the components that they have are compatible with yours. But if you're not confident with handling your own PC, I completely understand. You could take your PC to any Best Buy, Micro Center, any local electronics store, they'll all be able to diagnose your PC. I personally recommend Best Buy just because they give free diagnosis and they're generally located everywhere in the United States, so you probably have one near you. But honestly, they all have professionals that are very capable and they can all solve your issue. It's also worth considering that a repair might not be practical for your machine. If your motherboard and CPU are 3 years or older, it's gonna be really hard to replace them. And at some point, getting a new desktop is just that much more worth replacing an old one. If you're not going to use the desktop for intense tasks like gaming or video editing, then a brand new one's only going to cost you like $300. Just for the new components in your current PC and the cost of repair, you could be looking at like $250 anyways. And at that point, I just think it'd be more worth to buy a new PC. But that's just something to keep in mind as they inevitably try to upsell you when you take your PC in for a repair. The last thing I want to mention is that there are other ways to try and fix your PC. I've encountered some one-of-a-kind problems and sometimes it just doesn't make much sense. And in that case, you might want to take a look at online forums. Making a post about your PC problems on Tom's Hardware, Reddit, or LTT forums is always a good way to try to take extra steps to solve your problem. There are hundreds of IT professionals on these forums and they'll give you some very good tips on how to repair your PC, especially if you have a super uncommon problem. So you just booted up your PC, and instead of sending you to your OS, it sends you right to the BIOS. Well, the good news for you is this problem is relatively easy to diagnose. The bad news is it's very possible that you just lost all of your data. But before you panic, there are several other reasons that you could be having this problem, so follow along with the steps I'm about to tell you, but don't get your hopes up. The first thing I want you to do is something you've already probably done several times. Just boot your PC to the BIOS. Next, you're gonna look for a section called drives. This is different for almost every BIOS, so I really can't give you any specific details, But if you have any questions about your BIOS, there are plenty of tutorials online that showcase the individual BIOS. Now, if you see a boot drive, you could very well just be able to click boot from this drive and boot from it. But generally, most of the time, you're going to be having this problem because your PC doesn't even detect the drive. Now, if this is a brand new PC, of course you're going to boot to the BIOS. This isn't even a problem. That's because you haven't even installed an operating system. So use whatever you have, your flash drive, your disk, and just install your OS. And here's where we branch into two different paths. Your BIOS are either going to detect that there is not a boot drive, but you have a drive in your PC, or it's gonna not detect any drives at all. If your PC does detect a drive, but it just doesn't detect that it can boot from that drive, it's likely that a BIOS update or BIOS settings change can make all the difference. You wanna make sure CSM, legacy, or UEFI support is enabled. You also wanna make sure that Windows features are enabled. Make sure you're pressing F10 to save and exit so it's actually saving your settings, and then reboot. If you've changed those settings and it still isn't booting, you could always restore BIOS to factory settings. Unfortunately, this can be in various parts of the settings in the BIOS, so I can't tell you exactly where it is, but it's always in every BIOS. Now, if your PC is brand new, you could also try updating your BIOS. Now, keep in mind, if your PC has ever booted up before, this is not the issue. But if this is a brand new PC, especially a PC that came out within the last 3 years, it's actually pretty likely that this is your problem. It's also not even possible to do unless this button is on the back of your motherboard, and older boards don't even have this functionality. But if your problems sound a lot like what I'm describing, then keep following along. To flash your BIOS, the first thing you're gonna need is a flash drive. You're gonna plug that flash drive into another PC and look for the most up-to-date version of your motherboard's BIOS. Make sure your flash drive is completely empty and then download the BIOS onto that motherboard. But depending on your motherboard's brand, this can differ quite a bit, so I just recommend looking up a tutorial for your specific motherboard. Once those BIOS are successfully downloaded onto your flash drive, you can then plug that flash drive into the back of your motherboard. Then hit the button on the back of your motherboard and you should see an orange LED start flashing. It's at this point that your BIOS have started updating and you should leave it alone. After some time, this light will stop flashing and that means your BIOS are successfully updated. It's super important to not unplug this USB from your device while it's updating, as that will literally break your motherboard. Now that your BIOS are successfully flashed, you can try to boot up your PC. On the other hand, if your PC doesn't detect any drives in the BIOS, it's likely that you either installed your drives wrong or something has gone wrong to make your drives undetectable. Quickly check to make sure that all the cables coming out of your drives are firmly in place, both on the motherboard and the power supply. Also make sure that any M.2s are threaded correctly. I've had M.2 drives not be all the way in and still be able to be screwed down, so keep that in mind. If this doesn't solve your problem, you can always try replacing your SATA cable. If you have more than one storage method in your PC, you can always swap the cables around, but if you don't have any, unfortunately you really can't test if the cables are faulty or not. You can also use an anti-static cleaner such as a microfiber or a brush and gently dust off these connections. I should also mention that you should check the time and date in your BIOS. This rarely happens, but if your CMOS battery is damaged or drained, that time will be off and it'll cause you to not be able to boot from the BIOS. Also make sure all peripheral devices are disconnected. Sometimes broken devices can stop you from booting, but it is incredibly unlikely. And really the last option I have is to reinstall Windows. If you do detect a drive but you just can't boot from it, it could be that Windows got corrupted itself. Now keep in mind this is going to delete all your data, so make sure to back up any data you really need by plugging it into another PC and extracting the data from there. And unfortunately, if you can't even install Windows on that drive, it means that drive is bricked. It's worthy to mention that even though that drive is dead, it doesn't mean all your data on that drive is gone. There are plenty of tutorials online showing you how to take a dead drive, plug it into another PC, and they'll show you how to extract the non-corrupt data from that drive. You can also take it to a professional and they'll do the exact same thing. But remember, neither you nor the professional are going to be able to extract all the data, as something's corrupted on that drive. So your PC PC turns on and you can boot into your operating system, but it's really slow and it keeps crashing or stuttering and it's just not a good time. Well, I have some good news for you. If you follow all the steps below that I'm about to advise you to, I can help you fix this incredibly annoying problem. The very first thing I want you to do is make sure you have drive space. If you don't have any drive space left, it can cause all kinds of problems, including crashing, stuttering, or your OS to just run really slow. All you have to do is search for File Explorer on your PC and then find the My PC tab. This is going to show you all your drives and the space left on those drives. A bit of advice is that if any of your drives has less than 5 gigabytes available, then you're either having problems already or you're about to. To get more drive space, all you have to do is delete any programs that you're not currently using. What I recommend is to search for add or remove a program and look through the programs and install the ones you know that you don't use anymore. But remember, if you don't know what the program is, don't uninstall it, or at least Google it before you uninstall it. You can delete some necessary core programs from your PC this way, and that's pretty devastating. But if you do still have drive space left and that's not your problem, the next thing you should do is to disable any overclocking. Now, if you don't know what overclocking is, then just skip this section. But if you have overclocked your CPU or graphics card, you might be taking in too much power than your power supply is actually outputting. You see, power supplies over their lifetime become less and less efficient. So even if you overclocked your components a long time ago, it could be that your power supply is just at the point where it can't support the overclock anymore. Now, this can also be the case even if you don't have any overclocks, but in that case, there's not much I can do for you. Now, if you're still having problems even after disabling your overclocks, then you should check to make sure none of your PC components are overheating. This can be caused by a number of problems, such as poor airflow in your case, CPU cooler failing, or even if it's just hotter in your room than normal. To check to see if this is the case, you can download CPU Core Temp from a link down in the description. Core Temp allows you to check the temperature of your CPU, and if it's anything above 70 degrees, then you should be worried. You can then run the same check on your graphics card if you have one by going to Task Manager. All you have to do is click the Performance tab, scroll down to your GPU, and you can see the temperature. Again, if your GPU is running above 70 degrees, then it's a problem. It's time to check your case's filters to make sure there's not too much dust that's disturbing the airflow. Make sure all the fans in your PC are still working, and just generally clean off your PC. If there's too much dust buildup, it's just bad for your PC in general, and it will cause it to overheat. And if your PC isn't overheating, it doesn't have power drain issues, and it doesn't have storage issues, it's almost guaranteed that your OS is causing the problem. Now, I'm going to be going over how to fix OS problems in Windows and not necessarily other programs, because I'm gonna go ahead and guess that if you're running an operating system like Linux, you already know how to use these quick repair options. The first thing you're gonna wanna do is simply update Windows. All you have to do is press the Windows key, type in check for updates, and click. Then you click update your PC, and it's likely you'll have to restart your PC after the update finishes. It's kind of crazy how much a simple Windows update can fix in your system, but if that didn't solve your problem, then you can always run Windows Repair Tool. To do this, hit the Windows key, type in command prompt, and then run it as administrator. Once you're there, type in exactly what you see on screen, spaces and capitalization included. Then click enter, and this is going to take a while. This is going to scan all your Windows system files for any corruption it sees, and then it's going to repair them. Now, this doesn't happen very often, but your USB controller could be getting overloaded. To solve this, all you have to do is unplug all USB devices besides your keyboard and mouse and see if that fixes your issue. This doesn't really happen anymore on new motherboards, but I guess if you're running a bunch of USB hubs or something, it could. Now, what is more common is that one of your USB devices is majorly broken. It could be slowing down and even crashing your PC in some instances, so this is always worth a try. And lastly, if you're confident that it's not an overclocking issue, you have enough drive space, and it's not overheating, then Windows might just be incredibly corrupt. Sometimes it doesn't matter how many different repair tools you use, Windows is just corrupt. This is especially true if this is a fresh installation of Windows. You could have just got a bad installation. And if you're okay with losing all your data, you could just run a fresh install of Windows. And if you do have data that you do need, you can always temporarily store your data in another storage device or a cloud. So if you reinstall Windows and your problem still isn't solved, I almost guarantee that you do have an overheating issue. The only other thing it could be is your power supply is bad, but I've never seen a case where a power supply inconsistently provides power like that. If you're still here at the end of this video, it either means you're really cool and watching it to the end, or I didn't solve your issue. And if I couldn't fix your PC problem in this tutorial, I want to say sorry for wasting your time. I really did try to compile every single fix that you could do at home into this video. It really sucks that I couldn't explain how to fix the issue to you myself, but there are still a few things you can do outside of this video. There are several issues that are uncommon, or even one of a kind, that I'm obviously not going to be able to anticipate. So if this is an issue you're experiencing, you can always make a forum post on LTT, Reddit, or Tom's Hardware. There's plenty of hardware professionals on there that love dealing with these one-of-a-kind issues and will one-to-one help you out on your specific problem. It's also worth to mention that if this is a new PC build, it's likely that all your tech still has its warranty. If you suspect that one or more of your parts might be the cause of your problem, then you can always just ask for your warranty to send you a new one. You should also consider if your PC is even worth repairing in the first place. If your PC is super old, it's probably not that reliable anyways, and replacement parts are going to be extremely hard to find. Getting a brand new PC might even be cheaper, and it's definitely going to be easier. Thanks for watching. I hope I could solve your problems. I'm sorry if I couldn't. Have a great day.